Hi good people, Tinus here for the final video in our teleportation pad mini-series, and in this video we'll be baking and texturing our teleporter to prepare for final render and for the import into our actual game engine, which would be Unreal Engine. Let's not waste any time and jump right into it. Alright, we're going to be working in Marmoset. I like Marmoset Toolbag for two reasons. One, the baking process is extremely user-friendly. And two, it has a bunch of prepared textures and materials that you can just drag and drop on your model. So it kind of makes it quick and easy. But if this is your first time using Marmoset, I'll kind of walk you through it. The first thing we're going to want to do is check our import settings. So we can go to Edit, Preferences. And the one thing you want to make sure is, depending on the model that you're going to be importing, in our case it's an FBX, but maybe you're working in a different program. Instead of Blender, you're doing OBJ or something else. Whatever you do, make sure you check your model so it imports the materials along with the model. So that's important. Once you got that, we can do a new bake project by clicking the bread icon. And then from here, you can title it if you want, but I'm just going to leave the defaults. We're going to go down to the quick loader. I can hit load, and then I can choose our actual export that we did, which I think was this one. Whatever you named it in the previous one, basically. And then we have our low poly right here, which you can see if we toggle off low, and then we can toggle our high poly on here. If you click them both, they'll overlap, so just be aware of that. So it is a toggle. Now remember, the high poly has the color ID tagging, and we're going to need that to so we can drag and drop materials. That's why we did that. And the low poly pretty much has no detail or anything right now, so we're going to go ahead and fix that. The first thing I like to do is I'm going to set my output location. I'm going to tell it to bake inside this Marmoset folder. I'm going to set it to a PNG, and I'm just going to call it bake. Doesn't matter what you name it. And I'm going to set the samples to 16. And then I used a 4K texture, so I'm going to keep with that same format. So I'm going to bump to 2048. Just hit this little up arrow. It'll bump it to a 4096, which is 4K. And then I am going to bake out all my maps. So I'm going to do normals, curvature, ambient occlusion, and my material ID. With that all set, we can do preview bake, and it's going to basically load and create those textures for us in the location we specified, and this may take a few minutes depending on your computer's performance. So we'll be a little bit before we come back. Okay, and then we got a preview bake. If you have any baking issues, there are two common causes. One is scrambled geo, either in your low poly, but more likely in your high poly. The second would be bad UV unwrapping. So if you have any weird artifacts or weird issues, simply go back, and if you did, like the first example would be if you did the smart UV project on the UV unwrapping process, maybe try the manual process and see if that works a little bit better for you. If you did the manual process and you run into issues, then what you can do is go back and typically change seams. So wherever the issue is, see if there's a seam nearby, maybe clear that seam and try a different seam. I'll throw up some B-roll up now where you can kind of see me going through and trying different seams to see if I can get a better result. And a lot of this is kind of like trial and error, so you may run into some of those issues. In terms of the bad geo, that's a little bit more difficult. I do have a separate video that covers over baking issues that goes into a little bit of that. A little bit more thoroughly, so you can check that out if you wanted to expand your knowledge on that topic. But, looking at this isn't too bad. There's some issues with it. Looks like I have a weird artifact right there, but I think with the color that we add to it, it'll hide it because there's kind of a lot of damage on it anyways. So I am going to go with this, and this is going to be okay for me. So reiterating the point why we do bakes from high poly to low poly, because you notice if I hide this and I bring back the high poly, they look the same, right? With the exception of the color. So why not just bring this into Game Engine? Well, simply put, if we go into the wireframe view, the Game Engine is going to have a much harder time triangulating and rendering this object because you can see it is very dense. So especially if you're doing any type of geometry or physics with the object in question, it's going to have a harder time. Versus the low poly, this is going to be orders of magnitude easier for the engine to triangulate, render, add any physics if they need to. So it's just easier and more optimized. So that's the main reason why we do it. Now, is the quality going to be as great as the high poly? No, it won't, but it gets pretty close. So you can fake a lot of the detail and you can get away with a lot. So, but I'm happy with this result, so I'm just going to hit the bake button. And this one should be a lot quicker because it's kind of already pre-done. So it's just going to save the settings. And now we can actually begin to do the texturing. All right, so to create a texture, I'm going to collapse my bake project, and I'm going to click on this little, I call it an easel, little paint thingy, and it'll create a new texture project. And then we have to do some pre-setup. Pretty much the main thing you got to worry about is on the right-hand side, you're going to select your actual maps that you baked out to. It's usually named default, or it might have kept the name you imported from Blender. Sometimes it does that, sometimes it doesn't. I don't know if that's a update thing with Marmoset, but it should be the one with all the bump information that you see over here. When you select that on the left-hand side, you can click this little cube, and it should import all your materials. If it doesn't, just click on each of the blank spaces and select the corresponding map to the name. So this one's curvature, so I'll select curve. That one already came over. This is the normal object, or OBJ, so that's the normal OBJ. And this one is the material ID, so that's going to be the mat ID. And then I have all my maps set up. I can scroll down, and under my export settings, I'm going to choose a different location. I'm going to set it to a PNG, and I'm going to give it a name. So this one's going to be the Teleporter Marmo Final Bake. So you may be wondering, why am I baking 5 maps and then I have to export 3 additional maps? I think it's more of optimization. So the game engine only has to do or handle 3 maps instead of 5, and you can actually add 2 of these maps into 1. So you'll see that here in a second. So let me just save this. This last map is called a mix map, and you'll notice in the red channel it has the ambient occlusion, green channel it has our roughness, and the blue channel will have our metalness. And then our normal will actually just show up in the RGB channel for the normal map, and the albedo, which is color, will also take an RBG channel. So I think they just do that for optimization reasons, because it's cheaper to load 3 texture maps rather than 5, so no big deal. With that all set, let's actually begin coloring. We can go into the texture tab at the top, and Marmoset, this is kind of where it shines. You have materials, like a materials library, and you have textures, metals, paints, all sorts of stuff. You basically find a particular element you want to use. If it has a little download icon, you just double click it, it'll queue it up and download it. And then once it's actually downloaded, you can just simply drag it onto a portion of your map. And because we use the material ID, it's mat ID assigned, so you can assign it to individual elements, however you set that up in Blender. On the right hand side, under the layer settings, you have your active maps. You can disable things like color, roughness, metalness, and your normal. And I don't really notice much with bump or AO, but this comes in handy when you're layering different colors and you want maybe you don't want the color to shine through, but you want the texture. So you can disable the normal map on the one above it, and the one below it, that bump information will shine through, but you'll keep the color from the layer on top. And I'll kind of show you what I mean in any second with that. But so pretty straightforward. I'm going to go ahead and delete that one. So starting off, I'm going to go with a nickel pocked, which is going to be towards the bottom, this one right here. And I'm going to drag this on the right side to assign this to everything. Alright, and now that I have that, I can simply right click and I'm going to add a fill layer. And then you'll notice from my fill layer, it covered up a lot of the map there. You see it's very shiny. If I disable the normal though, you'll see I'll get that nickel pocked texture to come through. And that's kind of what I want. Now that I have that, I can maybe do a color. So let's go to the albedo and let's pick something that you like. Don't necessarily have to find or do the same thing I'm doing. Maybe I'll do maybe a brown. And don't feel like you have to settle on the color because you can always change it later. I'm gonna do like yellow. How yellow can I get it? I'm gonna do a little weird yellow. Maybe something like that. Yeah, something weird, why not? Okay, so now I have my colors set. From here on the right hand side under the fill layer, you can right click, do add mask, and then we can do fill mask black. All right, now first thing you're going to notice is a lot of your detail is going to be missing, but that's okay. We'll get it here in a second. Basically all you have to do is just right click on the fill layer. We'll do add layer, processors, and then we'll do scratch. And then you can kind of see some of the colors coming through there, but it looks like it's not the right way. So if you need to invert the colors, top right corner, either this little paint drop or this paint drop should do it. Just click on that and it'll just kind of reverse where you get the metal scratching through, and the paint basically shows as the primary detail, which is what we want. Now, we have the scratch layers. You can add a grunge map or a scratch map. For this one, I am just going to do a scratch layer. And then there's a couple we can mess around with. Like let's say we did dense, drag that into there. And if you followed along in the previous tutorials, these are basically alpha masks, so these should look pretty familiar. Once you have a scratch layer set up or an alpha mask in there, you can drag and change the intensity. You can change the contrast. So you can get some interesting effects there. It's more metal, there's more color there. Probably gonna go maybe somewhere around here. And then under the actual scratch mask itself, you can change the intensity of the scratch or reduce it. The scratch contrast gives you kind of that effect here. And the scratch scale is how big or small the elements are, depending on what style you're looking for. But let's go ahead and scroll through because I don't really like that one. We can check the dots here. Let's do dense. And then if you're looking for, let's maybe reduce the scale, maybe looking for that sort of style. Reduce the intensity, you can wash it out a bit, bring it back. And a lot of this is going to be trial and error, just to see kind of what you like. But I don't like that one either. Fingerprint heavy is a really good one. I often find myself using that one. Because that one, can do something like that, increase the intensity, and you get some really cool looks just with that. feel like I always do that one, so let's try scratched. Scratch mark for scratches. That looks pretty cool too. Just the intensity of that. Bring it back a bit. The scale, make them bigger, or you can make them real small. I usually lean towards the left side of the scratch scale, at least what I've noticed. I find it tends to look a little bit better. That looks pretty cool. Maybe I think I'll stick with that. But you can see you got a lot of maps, so you can go through these and you can get a lot of different effects. And it's very easy. Just mainly drag and drop. Alright, but let's do another effect you can add to it. So we can actually go into the nickel pocked, or the base layer, if you didn't use the nickel pocked. And you can come into the albedo, which is right here. You can bump the contrast all the way up. And depending on the scratch layer you used, you'll get some pretty interesting rainbow effects. Kind of looks like a burn. And that can sometimes add some cool effects for you. And that very much depends on the scratch layer element that you do too. So if I increase the scale, yeah, maybe these scratches aren't going to show it as much, but you can kind of see it on the edges. It kind of looks like the metal's burned. Yeah, maybe a little bit right there. Not too much, but a little bit of extra detail here and there, and it can really make your models. Okay, but that pretty much is going to be the coloring portion for the procedural maps that I'm going to be using. So I can kind of minimize this. And then what I'm going to do is just shift select, and I am going to group that. That way I don't mess with that. So I want that to be the primary focus, but now I'm going to add some color to the other elements. And remember, this is a simple model, so there's not really too much going on with it. So I think for like the rivets, I'm probably just going to use a brass. Remember, they're mat ID tags, so I can just drag that, create something simple there, and then maybe I'll go with a tin. I like tin. Can drag that, and you can get that interesting effect, and that looks pretty cool. If you wanted the color to shine through, but you just wanted the reflectiveness, remember, you can select the albedo and disable it, and then you have something like that. And then if I hold shift and right click, I can move my light source around, and you can see it from different angles. Well, under different lighting, I meant. Alright, I think I'm happy with that result. So what we can do now is we can export the texture. So we have the, you can see it right here, the map is textured out. If we go back to our, actually, I think we can do it from right here. Yeah, we can. Just come back to your texture project, find the export, and you can just hit the export all. And that will actually process out your maps. Although you see I made a mistake here. Well, you may be all right with this, but I don't actually have Photoshop. So I'm going to, I don't like TGA, which I think is a Photoshop extension or file type. So I'm going to delete that. And even though I set the image to be PNG here, which I'm just going to cancel that, it's going to override with what you set here. So I'm going to set this TGA to be PNG under each of these maps. I'm going to hit export all again. And then you can see it's creating the maps in real time. And now it is a PNG file. It's much easier to work with. So these will be the textures that we actually bring into Unreal Engine, and these are just going to be the textures we use in Marmoset, so we don't really need to worry about them. All right, so we got the thing colored. Now the next thing is we need to actually export the model, so we have something to bring into Unreal Engine. Because right now, you probably could use the Blender export, but I say it's a better workflow. Just export the one from Marmoset. That way you don't run into any issues in case something happens with it. What I like to do is go into the Bake project and expand out these folders for each of the elements of your model. Find the high version of the model and just delete it. That way you're only left with the low versions of it. So, you know, the cheap, inexpensive version of it, basically. So now if you come over here, you're left with this. So now we can go to File, Export, and we're going to do FBX. I'm going to pick a spot, and I'll do right here. I'll call this Teleporter UE for Unreal Engine. And then save that. I don't want the lights, but I do want the model, and I want the materials. And then you can leave all the defaults for geometry and all that alone, and then just hit export. And then you should have a very cheap FBX model, which you can see it's only 370 kilobytes, right? So it's a very inexpensive model. If we exported the high, which I probably should have done just to show you, but that probably would have been about like 10 to 20 megabytes. So there, you know, that's your optimization right there. So that's what you're gaining. And yeah, that's pretty much going to be the majority of the Marmoset workflow, but as a bonus, I'll show you how to render this thing if you just wanted a portfolio picture. It's pretty simple. You can go into the render settings, and you can maybe use ray tracing. That way it looks a little more realistic with the lighting paths. And then I'm going to set it to use my GPU, so it'll be a little bit quicker for me. Yeah, and I think that's the only place I need to set that. And then we can go to the main camera right here. And then there's gonna be a few areas. Under distortion, sometimes you can add a chromatic aberration, and it gives you this cool effect if you're looking for that in your render. If not, leave it off. But I like the post effects. For sharpen, I will usually bring up the sharpen a bit, and you can kind of get extra detail rather than leave it washed out, especially if you're using like scratches and stuff. Don't go too far with it though, so it's kind of like give and take what you're going for. So maybe I'll do something like that. And then you can add a bloom if you want to hide some imperfections in your model. That's a good way to do it. I am just maybe going to add just a smidge of bloom. And I like a vignette, and I usually will bring the softness way up, so we kind of get something like that, and it adds a little bit more atmosphere to your model. And then you can find an angle that you're happy with. I don't know, I feel like maybe right there. And then I can play with the light source, shift and right click, and just move around, see what speaks to me. Yeah, maybe use something right there. Alright, and then if you wanted to add a film grain, I usually don't, but you can, actually add a film grain and mess with the intensity if you're looking for something more photogenic, I guess. Those are some basic settings I like to do. And then you can come into the sky and select library, and you can choose a brighter scene, something like alley, and that'll give you a much different feel or vibe. And then you can actually bump up the brightness, and you can get a much different effect there. And then if you wanted to, under rendering at the bottom, you can check the watermark if you wanted to add your own watermark in there. And then just simply go to render at the top. And then you can do render viewport or F10. And it takes a little bit, but it can leave you with a pretty cool picture. So if you just needed something to just add as a portfolio piece, or if you just wanted to share, very easy to render. So that's why I kind of like Marmoset. You know, it's a nice little, it's an addition. You can use it with any 3D modeling software. So it's pretty, it'll improve your workflows. I mean, it's very user-friendly. It's very forgiving. There's nothing stopping you doing, you know, the baking and the texturing in Blender directly. It's just, I find it was just a little bit harder to not only do, but also harder to troubleshoot, because this is a very quick workflow. So if I have a problem with my model, I can go into Blender, you know, make my changes, you know, whether that's my UVs or my geo, and then I can just export it, dump it right back into Marmoset, and then just add the color and see if it's working. So it's kind of nice. All right, good people. This concludes the Blender portion of the Teleporter series. Be sure to follow me in the next one, where we actually take our model into Unreal Engine and we'll actually use it to teleport the player around the map. But as always, thanks for watching, consider subscribing, and see you on the next one.